for answering all those great questions. It's always a good discussion. So up next is Jennifer, and I'm going to say her name wrong. I'm just going to say Jennifer. She's a registered nurse for the past 23 years. She is our current palliative nurse at the Perth and Smith Falls team hospital. Her background is in medical oncology at the Ottawa General, but has worked in community for cancer care, medical surgical floors in hospitals, as well as in the operating room and ICU. I think you've covered it, except for the emergency department. She would like to share her story of her mother's illness, her quality of life, and her decision to use MAiD as a last resort.
All right, here we go. Thank you, Dr. Wehe, for the introduction and giving me the opportunity to speak in front of everybody. After these 23 years of nursing experience, I would never think to be in this position. Sorry, into this position. Oh, sorry. Sorry, the nerves. I never thought I would be in this position in my career. It brought a new purpose to my life, and as you will see in my personal story. As you can tell, I'm nervous. I don't generally public speak very often, so please let me know if there's any questions or if I need to speak louder. I think you can hear me. I apologize for reading my story, but there's a lot of information and events that have happened, so this will keep me on track. After experiencing my mother's death in October 2019, I truly believe I was meant to take care of palliative care patients. Seeing her go through all the palliative care domains and helping her make them happen is something I will always cherish. My mother made it easy for me to take care of her in all the stages. She was such a role model. She had started her own bucket list years ago. This always reminds me that palliative care is not end of life, but a chance to be able to close your chapter in early stages of diagnosis while you are well. She accomplished years of history in her genealogy journey and dated back to the 1400s. She made a cross stitch for me, dating back to 1409, with every generation having a mother-daughter with their last names. My mother even traveled to France with her family to research our ancestry through the diocese and the church records, and also visited extended family in Saint-Jean-Mont and Marseille. What cherished memories for us to remember. My mother wrote her own family recipe book. She was tired of her daughters calling, what's that ingredient for that recipe? And she was able to hand down those recipes to the next generation. She even reached out to her son-in-law for the Italian and Portuguese recipes so her grandchildren knew where they came from. She reached out to her estranged brothers after 30 years and formed new relationships. Able to share stories of her genealogy travels, was able to inherit her own grandfather clock from France, passed down from 2 generations. It had to be restored due to wormholes from the dirt floors back in the day. I now have that grandfather clock to hand down to my daughters. We watched the progression of her middle brother go through vascular pain due to gangrene. He was a candidate for MAiD with the first doctor's assessment, and this was when I think MAiD first got started back in 2016, but failed the second assessment due to the confusion from the blood infection from the gangrene. He had pinned a nurse to a wall, pulled out his catheter and said profanities to his wife. It was so uncomfortable to watch him go through that. He ended up going to Elizabeth Briere with a CAD pump for sedation to keep him comfortable. I was there to support my mother. She knew at that point that she didn't want to suffer like that anymore. She wouldn't want to suffer like that. She also witnessed her own mother being revived with CPR against her mother's wishes and was in the ICU for a long time and then died. My mother saw how horrible and how poor her quality of life was. She always remembered her mother's stare. My mother also helped and cared for my father with end-of-life emphysema. He used to say, tired of living, a few words, shit, sorry, and scared of dying. He died suddenly at home in October 2007. After my father's death, after a long period of time, my mom started to rekindle her old friendships, an old love of her life, and old co-workers from Air Canada. I was able to meet a friend who I was named after. So this is my mother's cancer journey, and this is her picture here. This is her basically saying, not to let cancer get to her. My mother lived her life to the fullest, even at the age of 74. She would dance 30 hours a week prior to her diagnosis and would travel down south with her dancing friends from Tanya's dance studio every year. This was her social therapy when my father had passed away years ago. She used to tell me, you can never cry while dancing. In February of 2019, she went down to the Dominican Republic with her dancing group for about a month. She had contracted some gastrointestinal flu. It knocked her right out, to the point at times she would be crawling up the stairs. It took her a while to get over it, but she wasn't never back to her baseline. In April, my mother felt a pinched nerve in her left jaw. My mother had bad teeth, abscesses at times, so I encouraged her to see the dentist, which he cleared her, didn't really find anything. The orthodontist cleared her as well, and the neurologist cleared her as well for the Bell's palsy. So our family physician decided to send her for a bone density scan in May, and that's where we all saw the metastases. The CT scan showed mets to the liver, adrenals, spine, bilateral femurs, and questionable primary diagnosis of lung cancer. The brain MRI showed brain mets with small lesions. I just remembered looking at those scans with the oncologist and thinking that the dark spots looking like bullet holes throughout her body. My mother never wanted to become a frequent flyer of the hospital. It was her personal decision to decline chemo. She wasn't a candidate for immunotherapy because she could not find enough cells. They could not find enough cells for the 2 bronchoscopes for the targeted cell therapy treatment. So my mom opted for the radiation to her spine and femurs for palliative comfort. My mother asked me if it was possible to apply for MAiD at that time and to have it kind of like in her back pocket for when she was ready. She felt her quality of life was diminished since the cancer had took her driver's license, which was the brain mets, and the oncologist told her that she couldn't dance anymore due to her mets to both femurs. So my mother, looking at my mother, everybody was shocked that she had cancer because my mother always looked well, always dressed nicely, taking minimal drugs for pain. I couldn't even keep up with her. She still had a lot of energy. She had a beautiful summer that summer, and she would, flip it over. There we go. Sorry, guys. She would say to the doctors for the follow-up appointments, what am I doing here? I feel great. I have a boating excursion to go to. She literally said that. Her oldest daughter was able to come down from England for a visit and to visit for a few weeks to organize to help her move. We moved her out of her town home into Waterside Retirement Home where she volunteered, enjoying all the facilities, the pool, the gym, etc. In August, I got a call from Tanya's dance studio requesting would it be okay to have a celebration of life for my mom? When I asked my mom, she responded, do people really do that? Would people actually come? I reassured my mother and said that it sounds like they really care for her, and why not? It's her journey. So we organized a beautiful celebration mid-September. She told her dance partners not to spin her around because she would feel dizzy and potentially fall. The studio dancers had a performance lined up for her as well. Her grandchildren and family were able to see her dance, and the studio had decorated all the walls with beautiful dresses. What a memory to look back on. At the end of September, my mom would say, "My right leg is lagging every fourth step on the treadmill at the gym." My mom knew her body so well. So I personally texted the oncologist, which I used to work at the Ottawa Hospital on the medicine oncology floor. So thankful for that team, the most compassionate people ever. My mother was never admitted to the hospital, not even one day. I was able to take care of her symptoms at home. Her radiation oncologist asked for a visit at the hospital. I stayed overnight the night before, and she had fallen out of bed. Apparently, she said, "That happens all the time." And I'm like, red flag. She had a glazed look on her face. She looked very pale and frail and was sane enough to make the decision to wait for that morning for that appointment. And that's when they told us. They thought they had seen a spot in her brainstem last June, which they weren't sure since it was so small, but now she was having symptoms with her right leg. So they offered her brainstem radiation. Then they said, "It may give you 2 months, but definitely not years." At that point, my mother said, "Whoa, les moteurs," the French mother. Of course, that means, slow down. You're not touching my brain, and wanted MAiD. I had asked her to think about it for about 24 hours because it was a new shock to her with all the news. We would have to call my sister in England to notify her of the news. Surprisingly, my mother never used many opioids to control her pain despite of her bone meds, but because in the back of her mind, she wanted to be sane enough to be able to make that MAiD decision because of her brother's death. She woke up the next morning and stated, "I'm done." Feeling weaker and her right leg lagging, wasn't eating very much, nauseated, worried that the cancer would give her other symptoms, possibly a stroke. We called my sister and arranged for her to come visit again. The family physician stopped by to assess, and my mother was looking tired, weak and frail in her jerry chair, and looked at the physician's eyes while lifting her arms and shoulders up to say, "There's really nothing left." Her family physician knew her wish as well as everybody, the radiation oncologist, the respirologist, and her medical oncologist. She was able to choose my father's date of death 13 years ago. In a weird way, it was comforting. I stayed with my mother for that week. Work was very supportive. My mother made me go back to the bank, the funeral home, etc. She had already prepared everything. My father had left his wishes as a one-liner, and my mother left me a binder. Which do you think was easier to deal with? In October, there was advanced care polling for the Friday before Thanksgiving weekend. Her one last dying wish, I'm sorry if you're a Liberal, was to vote against Trudeau. So she was very adamant about that. She became so weak that she needed a walker to bring her there, and needed somebody to stand beside her. She chose to have Thanksgiving dinner with her family at the restaurant. Usually Sunday dinners were at her home. I remember getting her ready in the shower that day and having a hard time getting her in, assisting her with getting her dressed, blow drying her hair, trying to curl her limp hair. When she was ready to go, she looked like she was dead man walking. At the restaurant, she had difficulty getting up a few stairs, stoic, and then she sat down looking around the table. Usually my mother always has something to say, but this time she was enjoying the conversation. When she was ready to leave, she stood up and said her goodbyes to each and every one of us. We hugged and gave kisses and sat back down. And she wasn't ready to go. She wanted a second round of goodbyes. It was a weird, super weird feeling, but looking back now, I knew she was thinking this was her last gathering. Then she started to sleep about 20 hours a day after that Sunday. She became a two-person assist. On the Tuesday, I was able to pick up my sister at the Montreal airport and have somebody stay with my mom with home care. When my sister and I arrived late that night, my sister was able to spend some time with our mother. My sister decided to sleep in my mom's bedroom, and I stayed up in the living room with my mom in her hospital bed. Between the hours of midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning, my mother was breathing kind of funny. I said to myself, here we go, it's coming. In that point, I couldn't sleep. The gut feeling as a nurse, I started timing her respirations, and at that point, it had stopped. When my mother woke up in the morning, I cracked a joke and said, you know, Julie's always the troublemaker, and she laughed, but only one side of her mouth was raised, and I noted that she had right-sided weakness. My mother had agreed to call the doctor to notify her of her wishes. I called the family physician explaining the situation. They were able to come that evening, knowing how much my mother didn't want to suffer and lying in bed wilting away. The doctor was able to get consent from my mother, family, and the staff, and were able to complete the MAiD request that evening. I can't tell you how much it takes for a medical professional to see the signs of that window of opportunity and the compassion of a daughter's love to advocate for her mother's wishes. I feel so blessed to have been given 6 months with my mother, has made us much closer and great memories. To have her hand hold my cheek in her last hours of her life. That's it.